This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy and TNC chapters throughout the western United States. Guided by science and grounded by decades of collaborative partnerships, the Nature Conservancy has a long-standing legacy of achieving lasting results to create a world where nature and people thrive. On the last Tuesday of every month throughout 2024, Mountain and Prairie will be delving into conversations with a wide range of the Nature Conservancy's leaders, partners, collaborators, and stakeholders, highlighting the myriad of conservation challenges, opportunities, and solutions in the American West and beyond. To learn more about the Nature Conservancy's impactful work in the West and around the world, visit www.nature.org. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guests today are Kelsey Molloy and Angel DeVries. Kelsey is the Northern Great Plains Director at the Nature Conservancy, and Angel is the Executive Director of the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, also known as RSA, and they both live and work on the Northern Great Plains in Malta, Montana. While they work for different organizations, Kelsey and Angel collaborate on a long list of critical projects, most of which are focused on grasslands conservation, ranching, and community partnerships. One of their most notable collaborations involves the Matador Ranch, a 60,000-acre TNC-owned property near Dodson, Montana. The Matador Ranch is home to an outside-the-box conservation initiative known as a grassbank, which is a partnership opportunity that offers ranchers grazing access to rich grasses in exchange for adapting sustainable practices on their own property. This grassbank was introduced during the historic drought of the early 2000s, and it offered much-needed grazing opportunities for ranching families whose home places had been hit hard by the dry conditions. Since then, for the past 20-plus years, the grassbank has continued to provide win-win solutions for ranchers and conservation-focused nonprofits, as well as helping to bolster trust, goodwill, and community cohesiveness. As you'll hear in this conversation, the grassbank has been such a success that TNC is currently searching for another ranch to acquire and eventually transform into a community-led and community-owned grassbank. This grassbank 2.0 will not only provide a grazing safety net during times of drought, but will also further the work of providing opportunities for new or young ranchers who are just entering the business but do not yet have the capital to purchase their own land. I connected with Kelsey and Angel via the magic of the internet, and we had a wide-ranging conversation about their productive collaboration, grassbanks, challenges and opportunities in the Northern Great Plains, and much more. We talked about the work of the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, the history of the Matador Ranch, and the ins and outs of the Matador Ranch grassbank. We talked about how skyrocketing land values are making it nearly impossible for new ranchers to enter the business, and also how succession planning is becoming an important but often underappreciated issue for ranching families. We talked a lot about the need for optimism and curiosity, the importance of building community, and how TNC and RSA are working to bridge cultural and geographic divides. We also learned about RSA's book club, which will likely be of great interest to many of you. I learned so much from this conversation and really appreciate Kelsey and Angel taking the time out of their busy schedules to chat with me. Hope you enjoy. Kelsey and Angel, I am super excited to chat with y'all. I love the part of the world where y'all live and work. I moved to the West, like a lot of people from the East Coast, for big mountains and, snow-capped peaks. But as I've spent more and more time on the plains, I've fallen in love with that area. And such a special place for so many reasons, and particularly from a conservation standpoint. And so I was thinking maybe to start this thing out, since we've got two of you here, we can identify the name with the voice. And Kelsey, maybe if you could start out just talking about kind of who you are, who you work for, and what you do kind of through your job there on the Great Plains.
Sure. Yeah, so I work for the Nature Conservancy for Montana chapter. and I live in Malta, Montana. And so I'm our Northern Great Plains Director, which is a role I just started in June of this year. but I've been working for TNC for 7 years and I've been in Malta for 10. And so in this role, I'm managing our whole Grasslands program in Montana. And so that encompasses several things. We do stewardship work, so working with folks on the ground projects like stream restorations and grass seedings. We have a candidate conservation agreement with assurances program. We do protection work through easements. And then we have our Matador Ranch and grassbank that we'll talk about more today.
And also, before we move on to Angel, could you talk a bit about, just give a brief overview of how you ended up in Montana?
Yeah, it was a long drive. I grew up in Rhode Island and went to school like 5 minutes from where I grew up. So afterwards, I wanted to go somewhere new and different and I guess far away. So I went to Canada for grad school. I went to the University of Manitoba and I was doing research on grassland birds and cattle grazing in Grasslands National Park. So the park is in Saskatchewan and it hadn't been grazed for like 20 years and they reintroduced cattle grazing there. And that is just across the border from where I live now. So it was an area that I was pretty familiar with. So when I was looking for work and there was a job in Malta, I was like, oh, it's like similar culture, similar ecosystem to where I had been in Canada. So that's how I ended up down here. Started out with the Sage Grouse Initiative position at the local NRCS office.
Nice. That's really, really cool and inspiring. And I can appreciate it because, having moved out this way as well. So that's, except I live now in a city of 500,000 people and you're, you're out in the wide open spaces. Angel, can you talk a bit? I know you wear many, many hats. I'd love to hear more about kind of a summary of everything you're up to.
So I'm Angel DeVries and my full-time job is executive director with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. We'll talk more about the organization, but myself personally, I'm married to a local rancher. We are on his family operation. He's fifth generation rancher and we are raising the sixth generation. It's a predominantly cow-calf operation. We also do some like yearling bull sales, commercial sales. So we are very much involved in the agricultural community and we care a lot about our small town. We both grew up here in Malta. So I was basically born and raised here. I went up to college and got my CPA license,
nice.
Got my accounting degree and I'm a CPA. Yeah. So I came back to Malta and started working for an accounting firm. And of course, our biggest clientele was like egg producers. So I just really developed a passion for agriculture, especially in these small communities. And I took some time off while we were, starting a family. And when I came back to the workforce, I landed my job with RSA. And so that's kind of my story there.
And can you give a brief overview? And again, we could talk for 3 or 4 hours about everything y'all are doing, but can you give a brief overview of RSA and kind of the mission and goals of the organization?
Yeah, we are the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, and we started 21 years ago. It was a group of producers in South Phillips County, just really interested in having a say at the table when there was like a lot of outside pressures, a lot of outside interest in this landscape. And the producers and the ranchers just really wanted to have a bigger say at the changes that were coming. And so through the years, we've grown and developed into a rancher-led organization. And we really focus on keeping grass in grass, keeping ranchers ranching, and just preserving this landscape that the ranchers have stewarded for many years. And so that's part of our mission. Our mission is ranching, conservation, and community as a winning team. And so we really try to do anything that encompasses a win-win-win for all three of those categories. So what that looks like practically is conservation projects with private landowners. So that could be like reseedings or water projects or fence projects. And then the other programming that we do is education. So anything that can help keep ranchers successful and keep them ranching in their business, like that's a key priority for our organization.
I know that every ranching family is different and everyone's working with different challenges and opportunities and all that. But in your experience and over the history of the organization, like what would you say over the last, maybe we say 4 years since COVID, maybe, what have been some of the main challenges that you've seen ranching families in that area dealing with? I mean, I know real estate prices in rural areas have gone up. I mean, I think that's kind of all been happening for quite a while. But if you had to name one or two of the top challenges that you're seeing that you and RSA and your team are trying to help with, what would those be?
Oh man, that feels like a loaded question, but I'd say there's a few things. I mean, one thing that pops to mind most recently was the droughts. The droughts in 2020, 21, 22. And that's where our conservation program really tries to come in and help with, reliable water sources for cows and livestock or wildlife as well. So the drought is always something that, we're going to struggle with. And unfortunately, that one's a little more out of our control, right? And then I would say the other topic that comes up a lot when we think about how do we keep people on the landscape? How do we keep people ranching? The next biggest topic is succession planning. And I'm not sure how familiar you are, but it is the amount of turnover that happens in a ranch business is astronomical. And it's challenging because it's not just as simple as hiring an attorney and making it happen. There's so much social emotional that happens with, passing on a business to your heirs or maybe not your heirs. But that, for us is an area that we see as a risk, that if people don't have good succession plans in place, the likelihood of that land no longer being in egg production and being sold elsewhere and not have cows grazing on it anymore is really high. And so good succession plan is definitely at the top of our list of what we're seeing. And then of course the rising land prices, which we'll talk a lot more about in our discussion today, but it is really hard. And my husband and I sit down and look at properties and just knowing that if we were to buy a property, we almost, you can't put enough cows on that land to make your land payment. So then you have to be collateralizing, some other land that's already paid off. And that just starts to be hard when you really put yourself in a lot of debt. So I think that's what we're really seeing with producers as well in our community is how can you buy land and expand your operation when the cows or, the livestock can't even make the land payment.
Yeah. And you think, where y'all are located, it's, pretty low density population. It's wide open. And it's amazing to think that, around, it's pretty well known that around resort areas, like outside of Bozeman or whatever, the math just doesn't work out. But you think in these just wide open plains that the math, because of the real estate values, the math doesn't work out. It's just it's a wild thing to try to get, for me at least, on the outside looking in, to get my head around. It's almost like if the land's not affordable out there, where is it affordable? And maybe the answer is nowhere. I mean, is that a crazy thing to think that it's really not affordable anywhere?
I would agree. Yeah, it's not a crazy thing to think.
And then another thing that I noticed on the RSA website that I thought that you mentioned earlier, I thought it's very, very just practical and it's inspiring, is it says you focus on relevant education, sensible conservation, and inspired conversation. And I feel like talking about succession planning and really some of the nuts and bolts of the business side of ranching and passing these properties on, or if you have to figure out how to sell them in a way or do easements. And I would guess with your background in accounting, you really bring a lot of really nuts and bolts value to a lot of ranching families. Am I right in that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got an opportunity to work under someone who was very well respected in the egg community from an accounting standpoint, and trying to build businesses that make sense for individual families. And I saw every, scenario of, how you set up different corporations and do payments and make things as fair and, as equal as possible for those families. I was really blessed with that opportunity. But every situation is so unique, right? And so for RSA's job is just to help people understand the opportunities out there so that they can make the best decision for their operations.
Kelsey, could you talk a bit about Matador Ranch? I mean, we could go talk about your work at TNC in a million different directions, but I feel like if we can kind of zone in on Matador Ranch, and if you could maybe talk a bit about the history of that, and then we can talk about some of the grassbank work that you guys have done. But I'd love to just get an overview of that property and project.
Yeah, so just following up quickly on some of what Angel said. So from the conservation perspective, we also are thinking about ranch succession, because when those ranches transfer ownership is when there's the highest risk that they might leave ranching and get converted to cropland, which is one of the big drivers of habitat loss and wildlife species decline here. And so, there's both the human element of it in that, I do think there's a lot of value in having healthy human communities, and also the risk point for a lot of these ranches is when they're sold to new owners. And so for us, we see healthy ranching communities equals having intact, healthy grasslands.
That all makes perfect sense. And so when did TNC acquire Matador Ranch?
So we bought it almost 25 years ago in 2000. And originally we bought it with another landowner who was running cows there. So we knew that we wanted to graze it, but we didn't necessarily want to get into the cattle business ourselves. After a couple of years, we were in a drought here in the early 2000s, and a local landowner brought to us the idea of a grassbank, which was modeled on something that was happening in the Malpa borderlands. And so the original grassbank, and it's stayed fairly similar over time, is the idea is that we have multiple people bring their cattle to the Matador. We manage the grazing, and they can get discounts on their grazing fees based on conservation they're doing on their home place. So the grazing rate is set at whatever the state average is. I think it's $30 or $32 an acre or an AUM right now. And then they can get up to half of that grazing fee taken off their discounts. So we require that everybody runs in common. We have 3 herds, 2 cow-calf herds and a yearling herd. And so you're running in that group with other people's cows. So we do give a discount right off the bat just for that. But then you can also get discounts for having prairie dogs on your property, for having sage grouse habitat. We've done some kind of one-off discounts, like if, say, you were doing a grass reseeding or something like that. So that's kind of the basic premise. And the way we've set it up is that we're responsible for maintaining the fence and water, and we make those decisions about management. But then the ranchers who are involved, they come and doctor cows, and they take turns doing that. And they make the decisions about, what vaccinations the animals need to have and what kind of bulls and what are the turnout dates for bulls. So it's been a great conservation success in that we're kind of extending our impact beyond our preserve boundary. But it's also really been fun to see different personalities working together.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it seems like just such really a way to create community, in a very meaningful and impactful way that really helps everybody. A question about the conservation practices on the ranchers' home places, like for example with the prairie dog. Is it some sort of agreement that prairie dog towns or habitat or whatever will not be disturbed for a certain number of years, or is it on an annual basis? Like how do you evaluate the conservation aspects of their own ranches, but how do you make sure that those conservation characteristics are held in place for a certain number of time?
Yeah, so we have a lease, and most of our leases are annual. Some of them are a couple years long. And so that lease details those discounts, but we do have a requirement to be in the grass bank. You have to agree not to sod bust on your home place, because we didn't want to incentivize people bringing cattle there and then bringing stuff up at home. But most of the discounts are voluntary, so you have the option to take the prairie dog discount. So it's an incentive; it's not a requirement. And then we do monitoring every other year. We have a staff member who goes out, and now he's been using a drone to monitor the size of those prairie dog towns. Because you get, it's a per acre discount, and the discount goes up. The per acre amount goes up based on the size of the prairie dog towns you have. So we do some monitoring, but it is voluntary. So each year they have the decision to opt in or out. And
so that started in the drought around 2002, and it's continued on every year since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think since 2003 we've had grassbank members, and the who's on the ranch has changed over time. I mean, we have some people who have been there for the last 20 years, and then we have other people who have only been there a couple years. We have some new folks this year. So it does kind of change over time as people's operations change. And we do try and allocate about 10% of the grassbank AUMs to beginning ranchers, which was a decision that the ranchers who were participating already made a choice, recognizing that if you don't have a home place per se, then there might not be that conservation benefit. But those ranchers gave up some of their AUMs so that other folks could come in because they wanted to make sure that there was a future there. So
what have been some of the big lessons or takeaways? And I mean, it could be great things that have happened. It could be some opportunities or some challenges that came about as you were, going through this process for the last 20 years. I mean, obviously you said you based it on the Malpa borderlands system, but I would imagine that, being kind of on the other side of the United States, that it's very unique in a lot of ways. Like what have been some of the lessons learned either from the community or from a TNC standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially I haven't, been here for that whole 20-year period. I think for me, it's been really powerful to see people working together. I think another thing I've learned is just that trust takes time, but it has big payoffs. Like a lot of these people we have been working with for a long time, and now we have a good relationship with them. And now we worked with easements with folks who maybe 20 years ago wouldn't have done that. And it has kind of built where now like Ranchers Stewardship Alliance is thriving, and Angel can talk more about that and how that started. But, it does feel like these things, like you can't rush this stuff.
Yes.
My boss would always say, Brian Martin would always say that conservation moves at the speed of trust. And so, and I think a lot of people were nervous when we first showed up because it was a new thing. And with the grassbank, there was a lot of hesitation locally. And I'm sure that some people still don't like that we're there, but 20 years in, I feel like people feel a lot better because we are working with local ranchers and adding to the local economy. And yeah, it just takes a while to get there.
Oh yeah, it definitely does. And, here where I live in Eastern Colorado, I've had Matt Moorhead on this podcast, and long before I even started this podcast, I worked with him in different capacities, and he's been out in Eastern Colorado for now 25 years, building that trust slowly over many years. And if you look at the projects that TNC has done out in Eastern Colorado, it was kind of a few, and then at about the 20-year mark, it really took off because all that goodwill and trust, it really, started paying dividends for everybody. And there's no shortcut. Angel, I'd love to hear about your perspective on the grassbank, being a local and, having deep roots there in that community. What have you, observed about the whole process of TNC and Matador Ranch doing, providing this service to the community?
Yeah, I think my perspective is it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity for people to have grazing where they may otherwise not be able to have grazing. I think it's great that, that land that TNC owns and is still being used for egg production. There's still cows grazing there. The wildlife is still flourishing, and it's being managed in this like very group collaborative effort. At RSA, we really love anything that's collaborative and working together. And I think it's an opportunity for people and producers to learn from one another, to build empathy, to build camaraderie. And I think it's been a great tool that people in our community have an opportunity to be able to graze there.
Yeah, it really does just seem like a pretty amazing model. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, I was just going to add with the learning. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of transfer of knowledge between, we have folks coming from like 70 miles away. We have one person coming from Valley County, which is, the next county over. So there's people who maybe wouldn't have talked to each other or would just like kind of know who they were, but not actually be managing cattle together. So there's a lot of room for that education just among ranchers. But then also we've done We've had quite a bit of research done on the Matador over the years on like grassland birds, but a big one has been on antelope migration and wildlife friendly fencing. And so now that we have like really firm science about that, some ranchers have started doing that. And now RSA is funding through grants people to do wildlife friendly fencing on their properties. So I feel like there's things like that where it feels like at the time, like there's not a direct impact. And now like 10 years later, it's like, Angel could probably tell you the numbers, but they've done like, I don't know, maybe 100 miles or something of wildlife friendly fence modifications.
Really? And so for people who may not, they've heard the term wildlife friendly fence, but don't fully understand what that means. What does that mean? Can you describe that, either Kelsey or Angel? Can you describe what that means?
Yeah. So especially for antelope, they typically don't jump over fences. They go under. So here the specifications are 18 inches for the bottom wire and 42 inches for the top wire. Because for species like deer or elk that are jumping over, if that top wire is too high, they might get hung up. So it's basically, and there's different ways you can do that. Because you can also just like kind of clip fences in places so that there's a place for animals to go under, or leave gates open. So there's other ways to modify fences, but it's basically a fence that an ungulate could approach and actually be able to move through it.
Have there been any examples that you guys can think of other organizations or other groups throughout the West kind of, taking this example of the Matador Ranch and the grassbank and doing their own version of that? Because it seems like a really, kind of a great model that would help a lot of people. And I know that TNC is thinking about expanding their footprint doing this, but how has this idea spread, if at all?
I think slowly. A lot of people are interested, but actually making it happen can be difficult. So there is, in Grasslands National Park in Canada, they've set up a program with a local nonprofit where they're trying to create certain habitat targets for species, and landowner or the folks grazing on the park can get reduced grazing fees if they're meeting those habitat targets. So kind of similar with the conservation discounts. And then we have a group that we work with south of the Missouri River called the Winnett ACES. And Winnett is a small town there in Petroleum County. And so it's a similar group to RSA, which is a rancher-led local collaborative. And they have also been interested in doing a grass bank. And so they did do kind of a trial run for a year where they leased a property and had 6 or 7 younger producers bring cows there. It didn't work out long term because then they weren't able to buy that property. So I think that is a big hurdle, is having a property to do this on. And then, getting a bunch of people to work together. We've talked about one of the reasons it seems to work at the Matador is though, all the ranchers have input, especially on the cattle health kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you need someone who gets to make the final decision, and that's the ranch manager. And so it helps to have that like model of everybody getting input, but then having one decision maker instead of 20 people making a decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. Angel, anything to add to that?
No, obviously the Winnett ACES is a very similar group to us trying to do that same thing, but I might give a shout out. There's also an agency locally here that has been doing something similar from a conservation standpoint. So the Bowdoin National Wildlife Refuge, just east of Malta here, they started working with producers as well to put the cattle on the refuge and have it grazed, because what was happening was just such a thick overgrowth of dead grasses on the ground, and it was actually making it challenging for wildlife to like move through the refuge. And so the federal agency manager worked with producers to allow cattle to graze. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because we were one of the producers, like our ranch was one of the producers that grazed there.
Oh, cool.
And it was right during the drought that happened in 2021, 22. And honestly, if it were not for that grazing on the wildlife refuge, we wouldn't have been able to come out of the drought as good as we did. I mean, we still had to cut back a lot of numbers, but I think that's just another example in the same way that TNC offers grass to producers, that even a federal agency was able to allow grazing on a national wildlife refuge, because really the group effort of livestock grazing and wildlife habitat, they go together, right? Like they really bring a beautiful like ecosystem working together.
So I understand their TNC may be in the early stages of looking into replicating the grassbank project, but not so much replicating it, but doing it again and then maybe adjusting it a bit. Kelsey, I don't know how much you can talk about that, but where does that stand? Where does that project stand?
Yeah, and maybe I can start and then Angel can kind of flesh it out a bit. But
yes, please.
I mean, basically for the last 15 years, we've been saying, gosh, this Matador thing seems pretty good. Maybe it's something we could do again somewhere else. And RSA and Win at ACES have also both been interested in having a grass bank. So our kind of new model, or Grassbank 2.0, as we're calling it, is that we're working with both groups to look for a property right now within their geographies. And the plan is that TNC would buy it. If it's not protected, we would protect it with an easement, and then we would donate it to either RSA or ACES and kind of work with them as a technical advisor to get it started as a new grass bank. So, I feel like this is a real test of the idea to say, okay, well, this is a good idea. Can someone else replicate it? But it will be a little different in that the focus is not so much on the conservation impacts beyond the property and those discounts, but the focus on this is on providing opportunities for beginning ranchers. So I don't know if Angel, you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you pretty well covered it, but Kelsey's right. I mean, the idea is that, when we look at land prices and then look at the cattle market or whatever livestock you're selling, it's really just hard to make a land payment with, the animals that you put on the land. And so this was an idea that generated with RSA and TNC about like, how can we create more opportunities? How can we build a place where people who want to be in the ranching industry have an opportunity to be successful? And it's interesting that we say beginning rancher, because beginning rancher could also mean a 22-year-old, like maybe fresh out of college or ready to enter the workforce in the industry. But beginning rancher could also mean your 45 to 55-year-old who built a career doing something else, but now like mom and dad want to retire. And so now they're entering the industry at later stages in life, or someone who is ready to be in ranching, but their parents aren't ready to retire. So how do they build up their equity and build up their operation when they, don't have land to do it on if their parents are still operating, on the land that they grew up with, right? So it's just this idea of building a space for more opportunities for people to be in the ranching industry. And I think that's the beauty of this Grassbank 2.0, is not only creating grazing opportunities, but also creating educational opportunities and being able to build another community and kind of replicate the community that the Matador Grassbank has built, and just to do that again. And hopefully that we're creating a positive experience, that we're benefiting our small rural communities and keeping people here in these smaller communities as well.
And so this could be for either of you. Perhaps Kelsey, you might be more in the loop on this, but what are the constraints to finding Matador 2.0? I mean, is it just finding the right property? Is it like we've been talking about the price of land out there is getting more and more expensive? I mean, what's the next step, I guess?
Yeah. So right now we're in the stage of looking for a property, and we kind of have the parameters around it. I mean, the big thing is it needs to be in one of the geographies that these two groups is working in, where there's already, connections and community interest. And then we need a property that's big enough that it can support multiple ranchers, because there's been a couple of properties on the market that are just too small. Like we don't want it to be a place where one person comes to graze, right? Like we want the impact to be bigger than that. So trying to find a property that's reasonably priced and an appropriate size, so that our hope is that we could have at least 5 or 6 grassbank members initially, with maybe 50 head apiece, just as a baseline for what we're looking for.
And so how big would that be? I mean, like, what's the ideal acreage for that you guys are looking for? Just so people can understand.
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on if it's tame grass or native, what the stock area is. But I'd say like probably 7,000 to 10,000 acres as a minimum size.
Wow. Cool.
Very
cool.
And so we've been looking at properties by calculating AUMs. So saying, we need a property that can carry at least 1,800 AUMs, which for those folks who don't know is an animal unit month. So it's basically the equivalent of saying, 300 head of cows for 6 months is what we're looking for as a starting point.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the history of the Matador Ranch, number one, or really any of these kind of collaborative projects that have allowed younger ranchers and ranchers in general to kind of cooperate and work together for mutual benefit. Are there any success stories that come to mind? Like, I always think it's, we can talk in these general terms about all these amazing projects you're doing, but I think it really brings it home when you can speak about individual family or individual person that was kind of a great success story. Do y'all have any come to mind from whether it's Matador Ranch or anything else you've been doing?
I would say, so Connie is one of our board members, and they are grazers at the Matador, and she just talks about how inspiring and encouraging the grassbank community was. It's, if you're trailing cows, moving them from one pasture to another out of the Matador, it's, it's easy to ride horseback side by side and talk about, well, what are you doing with this, or how are you handling the drought, and just being able to visit alongside of another producer that you wouldn't otherwise get a chance to like sit and visit with unless you made a conscious effort. So I think there's so much value in the community. I mean, obviously grass is great, place to graze your cows, but I think there's a bigger, larger picture of building a community and a place of trust and understanding there that you can't quantify.
No, I agree. Well, when I was initially preparing for this interview, I was looking on your website and I saw that Amber Smith is one of your board members.
Yeah.
She's amazing. And I feel like she is just a case study in community building. And she, obviously fully understands the power of community and has done so much in so many different capacities to build community. And so, when I was just like scanning your website for the first time and I saw her, I was like, oh, okay, I see what these people are doing.
She's on our grassbank committee. So right now we have a committee that's made up of folks from TNC, RSA, and ACES. And so we meet periodically to discuss like, what is the new grassbank going to look like? Is this property a fit? Things like that. And so, yeah, she's been part of that effort.
Well, here's a very basic question that's probably dumb, but I think one of the reasons that this podcast is spread is because I'm not afraid to ask dumb questions and sound dumb. Obviously there's this issue with sod busting and with plowing up the ground. Can y'all talk a bit about how much that's happening? And I mean, like, what are they growing? Like, if somebody were to plow up the grasslands there and start growing crops, what are they growing? How does it need water? I mean, it's a very basic question. I'm sorry, but I just don't know. And I'm curious to know, like, what type of crops are being grown out there that are competing with grasslands?
Right. It's primarily wheat, and we're primarily looking at dryland agriculture here, except in the Milk River Valley, which has been plowed for many years. And so there is still some conversion going on between like 2010 and 2020, roughly there. A lot of land came out of CRP here, which is the Conservation Reserve Program. And so in Phillips County alone, there were over 100,000 acres of marginal cropland that was plowed up, new crop ground. And so all those numbers come from the World Wildlife Fund's plow print report, and they just put out a report for 2024. So it's really worth looking at that because it highlights in which regions, like, what are the drivers of conversion? Like in the Dakotas, it would much more be like new corn varieties. Here, mostly wheat. And another thing we see is that it's a little bit sporadic. So like if wheat prices are low and it's a drought, people probably aren't going to plow stuff up. But we know that like there's all these other kind of worldwide factors at play that drive both cattle markets and crop markets. And so when we work with people and we're trying to create these stable communities or doing easements, like we're thinking like in the next 20 years, is there a chance this could get plowed up? Yes, it might not be this year, but the risk is still there for sure.
Yeah, I've just really recently learned, I just read a book and I actually interviewed the guy yesterday. It's a climate scientist, and he explains in his book he goes through the whole list of bad ecological things that happen when you start plowing up grasslands. Most notably just the amount of carbon that gets put up into the air. And I've always known that plowing grasslands is not a good thing to do. But now, just in the last week since reading that book, I have this real, almost like a frantic appreciation for how important it is to keep those grasslands intact. Kelsey, can you talk a bit about some of the easement work you've done? I know we were talking briefly before we started recording, and you had just completed an easement project recently. How much of a priority is conservation easements for protecting these grasslands from not being plowed up?
Yeah, it's a big thing that the Nature Conservancy does, although we only do it in certain areas. So in eastern Montana, there's only 2 land trusts that do easement work. And at least for TNC, we only do it in a couple of counties that we're focused on, because it just doesn't feel like there's a ton of value in, doing one in the middle of something and nothing else is protected and everything else around it gets plowed up. So we've tried to take a very focused approach on where we're doing that. And our easements are pretty flexible in that, they allow pretty much the existing uses to continue. So we're primarily working with ranching families, and they can continue to ranch, they can hay, they can hunt, they can do outfitting, recreation. So what's really restricted is building development, which isn't very much of a threat here, but nonetheless, people didn't think that was a threat around Bozeman, 100 years ago either.
Yeah.
And then we don't allow, plowing of native range. So it's a big priority for us just because we are trying to take that long view. But we try and make it so that it's something that, it works for both the landowner's goals and our goals. And it's something that a lot of people here have used as part of their succession planning. Like maybe if you have a kid coming home and you put an easement on your ranch, and then you can use those funds to either allow a parent to retire or to buy a nearby property for a younger person to get started. So from that perspective, it's just another tool in the toolbox for ranching families.
I wish I could have talked to you like 10 years ago when I was trying to understand conservation easements, because that's like the most succinct explanation I've ever heard that makes perfect sense. So thank you. Angel, we've obviously been talking about the grass bank, but I'd love to hear some of the other priorities that you and RSA have, because in studying your website, it just seems like y'all are working on so many amazing projects and different ideas, and trying to figure out ways to share knowledge. Are there any particular projects that you've either been working on recently or that are priorities for the future that you could highlight?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it feels like we have no shortage of projects at the RSA office.
You guys do great work with your marketing as well, because your website is awesome. And some of the films, like it really is, you do a great job.
Yeah. To touch on that, Ed, is like, we want to share success stories. We really want to offer some hope and inspiration, because man, it is so easy to sit around at the coffee shop and complain about the cattle market and the weather and the things that you can't control. And so RSA's goal in general is just to really provide opportunities and hope and inspiration for, the landscape that we live in and the people who want to be egg producers. And so kind of like I mentioned earlier, we have our 2 major programs. Our conservation cost share program is definitely our bread and butter. It's our biggest program. It's got the most people behind it. It's also got the most money behind it. So we really work with a lot of different funders, both non-governmental funders and other agencies, to just promote conservation projects with private producers. And it's all voluntary. Like, we don't force anyone to do it. We just, let it be known that we have the funding to do things. And then the producers will come to us and we build projects with them. So if they, for instance, have old CRP ground that they would like to be able to make it grazable, right? So it generally needs reseeded with grass. Oftentimes it needs fencing put around it. And oftentimes it needs a water source, right? So we're doing anything to keep grass and to keep ranchers ranching. And that's how our conservation cost share program really works. And so we've got projects going all the time, working with producers to just help them out on whatever, helps their operation and whatever their goals are. And so even that is a really big collaborative effort. And then our education program, again, is just anything that helps ranchers be successful. So we might do things from a grazing workshop or seminar to a ranching for profit seminar to talk about business and economics, to succession planning, to dung beetles and the cattle markets. You name it. We're just trying to provide education and provide tools and resources to our producers. So those are kind of the big things that we're working on. The succession idea that we talked about earlier, like knowing that is like a really big problem out there, that is a focus of ours. It's super hard to find funding for that. And so we are part of a lot of different other type of like landowner collaborative groups. So like we're learning from other people all around the West, the Midwest and West, about what they're doing to help producers in their area, and trying to find ways that we can replicate or create something similar here. So there are a lot of creative people out there. But the succession program that we would really like to see is just someone to come alongside a producer and just help them get their plan in place. And we talk a lot about succession planning, that it's really never done. Like, even when you do make a succession plan, it's probably going to change in a couple of years. But to get to a point where there's like some assurance that the land will stay in egg production and help producers, because anyone who's gone through a death in the family knows that there's always surprises, and we're trying to just eliminate some of those surprises and passing along the ranch operation. So that's something that we're looking at that we don't currently have as a program.
Yeah, it seems like just the process of going through the plan and kind of forcing everybody to sit down and really think about it in detail, and just get the wheels turning in that way. It seems like that's just as valuable as the actual plan, because I think a lot of people it's like life insurance or something. You just don't want to think about it because it's it involves somebody dying, and it's very emotional, and financially there's a lot going on there, and it'd be a lot easier to just ignore it. But I think having a group like yours that's just optimistic and welcoming, and look, we know how to do this and we can help. It seems like that's just really the best of both worlds. Another thing from your website, I mean, you mentioned this and it's clear just in your personality, but I really, really appreciate the positivity and the optimism, not head in the sand, Pollyanna kind of stuff, but it just seems like from the films and from talking with you and just everybody that's involved with your organization, there's this kind of focus on the positive, focus on solutions, focus on problem solving. And I feel like that's just in such high demand these days because everything is just so negative and polarized. And just I'm not in the ranching business, but after spending time on your website and then talking to you, I'm like, I want to do something with these people. They make me feel good. Is that, is that an important part?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we select board members, we select leadership, we select staff as people who are problem solvers, who can identify issues and challenges and say, okay, but how can we be a positive, impact on this? How can we be a light for what seems pretty dim and dark in a lot of ways? And so that's the cultural expression of our organization. I mean, obviously our mission is, ranching conservation communities, a winning team. So we try to focus on solutions that help all three of those categories. We want to help our ranchers. We want to keep our landscaped and our grasslands intact, and we want to help our rural communities. And we really believe that there are solutions out there that help all three of those. And so that's kind of the culture, and that's the way like our board leadership and the founders of RSA have set the tone, and we as staff just, follow with it. So it's a great organization to be a part of, no doubt.
It really seems like it. Go ahead, Kelsey. I was going to say, I find it so inspiring because when you go to school for wildlife biology, like there's not a ton of good news, I'm well aware of all these species, declining, going extinct. And so it's just so great to work with people who have a positive attitude and who are actually getting things done. Our partners with Win at ACES too have done some amazing stuff for being, their whole county is 500 people, and they've created, they've got beef in the schools, and now we have beef in the schools too, which was actually with our local cattle women who did that. But they've built a community center in Winnet. So there's all these things that just seem like when someone says, oh, in 5 years, we're going to have a community center. Or for RSA, the conservation committee started 7 years ago to say, we're going to have this fully functioning conservation program. It seems so big and daunting and like, can we really do that? But because people are so optimistic, it's like they say we're going to do something and then they make it happen. It's amazing. So for me, it's made my professional and personal life a lot better because there's a good attitude. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's everything. I mean, that's what I try to hammer home to my daughters is just, I feel like attitude is everything. And there are very, very few pessimists, like real hardcore pessimists that are super successful in life. I mean, I think that having that optimism is the key ingredient. And I mean, I force myself, I think by nature, I'm kind of a pessimist by nature and I don't like it. So I just bare knuckle it. I'm like, I'm gonna be an optimist. So it's kind of working, I think. Talking to people like you helps. So thank you. One question that I always ask people, and I'm very curious with both of you, I'm always looking for book recommendations and, whether that's about ecology or whether it's about agriculture or whether it's about leadership. And I feel like I've got people here, I'm talking to people right now who are experts in all three of those things. Or just about the history of the West. But I'd love to hear if you happen to have any book recommendations that you could give me on, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about your work, but just books that have been important to you. And Kelsey, maybe we start with you. Sure. I thought about this for a long time because I know you ask on all your podcasts about this, and I was like, I mean, I love reading, and I feel like every book I've read has shaped me in some way. I just, as a reference back to our earlier conversation, there's a book called Pioneer Cattlemen of Montana that was written by Walt Coburn about the history of the Matador Ranch in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's just kind of an interesting one, especially if you're familiar with the ranch, to hear some of the history. Another one was Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations by David Montgomery. Have you heard of that one? No, I haven't heard of that. It's super depressing. And when you think about... To balance out all your optimism, you read that book. Oh, every book I read is a huge bummer, basically. But that book is about how most civilizations have collapsed indirectly because of soil loss, because they were no longer able to produce enough food, and then there was conflict. And so he talks about how soil erosion rates are the same in the U.S. now as they were during the Dust Bowl. And so that's something I think about a lot, with keeping our native prairies intact, because they're also, that grass is keeping the soil there. And then on a more hopeful note, there's a book called Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. And he talks about and it's this whole idea of taking action with what you can control. So he talks about how you can plant stuff in your yard that support native insects and native birds. And I just really liked it because it was a very hopeful take, and a very much okay, I have, a flower bed here. What could I plant here that would support native species? So now I have 10 square feet of native prairie in my yard. Nice. I'll tell you, just being able to take action is huge. I think that's what I love about books. I was talking about this yesterday, actually, that if if you find a book that can spur you to take action, if you're feeling down about the world, that I think action is the key. So I need to read that book. Angel, you got any for me?
I do, but I don't know if they're really the genre that you are looking for, Ed. I mean,
I read everything. I recently recommended the Unabomber's Manifesto on one of my. So
I just had
it.
Someone recommend that one to me too. It's on my list.
It is. I mean, if the guy hadn't been bombing everything, I think he would have had some really good ideas. But he really lost a lot of credibility with the bombing part. But
that's
if you got a problem with technology, it's worth a read. But enough about the Unabomber.
Yeah, so I really like self-reflection books a little bit. So some of the books that are to the top of my list is Brene Brown. I really love her. I feel like she just challenges the idea of tough conversations and the idea of understanding one another and, like working together. So I think when I think about the work I do today, I really think a lot about Brene Brown and just that element of empathy. And I think that's part of like the culture of RSA is understanding both sides of the story sometimes and how we can work together. So I really love a lot of her books. I also love Atomic Habits. If you've never read that book,
I love that
one.
Book.
It's so good. It's just a really good way to think about like, how do you get to where you want to go as a person? If you want to be better at, making home cooked meals, like how do you get there? Whatever it is. I really like that. And then, one book that we did as an organization, like we did it as a book club with board and staff. It's been a couple of years now, but it's called Start With Why. And it's Simon Sinek, which if you know Simon Sinek, he's a great TED Talk guy. And that was a really good book for our organization, but also you could read that book from a self-reflective, like your own life, like why are you doing what you want to do? So those are some of the books that come to the top of my list that I really enjoyed.
Those are all great. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Well, I wanted to give a quick shout out to RSA because they have a book club actually, which meets in the fall. I think it's going on right now, and they're reading Bob Budd's memoir.
Yep.
But anyway, it's a great, we've had people from all over the country join it, and so it's really nice to have a venue to like read interesting books and then talk about them with interesting people. So I encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, we have a book club. It is happening right now, but we do one every year. And sometimes it's a really technical book about soil science. And sometimes it's, a memoir like Otter's Dance by Bob Budd. And it's just a way to create more community and to build build trust with other people. I'll got a quick book club story with RSA. So we had Elaine Fraze, she's farm family coach. So she's doing succession planning, right? So we had her come and do a full day workshop, both in Malta and Glasgow here, in March of 22. And following her session, we ended up doing a book club on one of her books. And we had this couple who ended up, I'm not really sure how they found us, but they found the book club and they joined it. And they I think they were like almond tree farmers in California. So totally different, type of agriculture than what we're used to here. And they just really loved the community that was built in that because they were going through their own succession planning and the struggles and the realities of the social emotional side of what comes with that. And so I just really love that story because they shared with tears, streaming down their cheeks, how they were so thankful to find people to talk about the hard things with. And so book club is a great spot for that.
I love that. I'll put a link to it because I'm sure there'll be a ton of people that are interested in that. It really is amazing how books with certain type of people, books can really bring people together and allow you to have real meaningful conversations. And I don't know, it's really pretty amazing stuff. I was at this conference or a presentation yesterday, and it was about the legacy of Aldo Leopold. And they had a lot of different speakers. And one of the things that they kept talking about is how I think the total out of the total population, only like 1% to 2% actually work in agriculture at this point. And so when you think about particularly private landowners and people, who are working in ag, they're, obviously producing food, but they are also providing these ecosystem services, for lack of a better term. They're providing clean water, they're sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, providing open spaces that are beautiful to look at that, I think in a lot of ways define the United States, these wide open, beautiful spaces. But it's only 1% of the population is actually on the ground in these areas. And most people are in cities or urban areas like where I am now in Colorado Springs, 500,000 people sprawling. And so, Angel, I'd love to hear from you since you've got such deep roots out in that area. What's something that if you had to just kind of give some words of wisdom to people in cities who maybe don't understand what y'all are doing in agriculture, what's something that you would like for people in cities to understand about what you're doing, and the role you're playing in society that they may not understand?
I think with anything, Ed, that one of the biggest things that we all want to be understood is that, like, egg producers, farmers, and ranchers, like, we're humans too. We're out here trying to make a living. We're trying to run a business just like, someone running a car rental business in a metropolitan city, right? Like, we're still humans. We're not trying to kill you. I understand that there are definitely things in agriculture that should be evaluated and looked at and maybe changed even. Think about our society's health as a whole. But we're definitely not out here trying to kill you. And producers, ranchers, I know from our own personal experience, they give their blood, sweat, and tears into raising animals. I watch sometimes the pure devastation on my husband as he tried to, save a calf being born that, maybe was coming backwards or something. And sometimes the days are hard. Sometimes they are really long. And so there's a lot of intentionality behind finding the good, the successes of it, because sometimes it is life or death, right? And, animals die, and that's really sad. And so you have to just really focus on the good things and the successes and the wins. But it's just a different lifestyle. It's our everyday. It's, the animals still have to have food and water, even if you want to go on vacation sometimes. And so it's just different. And I can say that I've got some really close family who live right in the heart of Seattle. And so we've got to, visit them and see their lifestyle, and they come and visit ours. And the questions they ask are very curious about, like, well, how does that actually work? And they question about, well, how does the calf get from being born to someone's table? And just that understanding, I would just encourage people to be curious and approach producers and people in agriculture with an open mind.
I love that. I think aside from the optimism, the curiosity is a secret to life as well. Kelsey, do you have any kind of parting words from everything you've seen? I mean, I just love your story, and I can really relate to it about, moving out west and finding this purpose-driven work. Anything that you'd like to wrap it up with?
Yeah, I think I would just say that, trust and partnerships are so important. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service, work with Bureau of Land Management, and we also work with all these individual private landowners and landowner groups. And that I talked earlier about, it's taken us many years to develop trust here. And I think that trust is a two-way street. So now, we really trust our partners, and we're putting a lot of trust and faith in Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Win and ACES. And so that's why we're willing and able to do this project, where we're saying, we're going to buy the grass bank with the end goal of it actually being owned and managed by someone else, because there's, a deep partnership and trust there. And hopefully it'll turn into something awesome and exciting.
Just to build off of Kelsey, and since Amber Smith, one of the most profound things she has ever said in a board meeting or to me with our work with RSA is we have to move at the speed of trust. And to me, that's just a really grounding truth. And just to echo what Kelsey is saying is, we may have big goals in mind, but we can't just like bulldog our way through it. We have to be really aware of what the outcome's going to be, because we're not going to get to where we want to go if we haven't built a foundation of trust. And I think that's another good thing to kind of leave behind.
I love it. Obviously I'm a super fan of the work y'all are doing. I'm excited to see where it all goes. Once the new grass bank is established, y'all need to come back and we continue to talk about that. But I just feel like the work you're doing, the actual specifics is so impressive. But I think even more impressive to me is how you go about doing it, building trust, optimism, curiosity. And I feel like if, no matter what business you're in or what you're pursuing in life, if you go about it with those characteristics, things will generally work out pretty well. So thank y'all so much for taking the time to talk. I really loved it. I hope we can hang out in person one of these days, but keep up the great work.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you so much, Ed. This was a real honor, and come up anytime.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.